theory explains the world, and because the theory explains the world, the theory is what's making you secure. It's kind of like that. It's like you have a theory in your head, and the theory makes you feel secure because it explains the world, but the reason it explains the world is because other people have the same theory in their head, and then when you both act out the theory, you both get what you want. And it's the coming together of the theory and the outcome that makes you, it's life. Not only does it stop you from being anxious and often make you happy because you get what you want, but it's not just psychological, you know, the fact that we do this, that we cooperate within our societies, we match our belief systems and then act them out, that's the predicate for a productive society. So it's actually, it isn't just that it saves you from death anxiety like the terror management theorists have it, it saves you from death. And that's good. I mean, being protected from death anxiety, yeah, good, that's great too, man. But actually not dying, that's sort of the fundamental thing that you're after. And so people have reason to defend their territory, if you think of territory that way, as you think about it as a domain where the fundamental presuppositions of each citizen are matched by the behavior of their co-citizens. They have every reason to defend that. And if it falls apart, it can have mortally serious consequences. It's chaos, you know, and that chaos doesn't just destabilize everybody psychologically, it destabilizes everything. It can destabilize the currency, it can destabilize the industrial economy, the lights can go off, it's like, it's not good. So, hey, no wonder people protect it. So then I started thinking about what a belief system was. And I realized that a belief system was actually a set of moral guidelines. And moral guidelines are guidelines about how you should behave. Also how you should perceive. And the reason that a moral guideline is necessary for you to perceive is that you can't look at anything without a hierarchy of value, right? Think about it, like how many things in this room could you look at? There's innumerable things in this room to look at. There's just all this squares, the little tiny squares in this fabric. You could look at those things for till the end of time, one at a time, but you don't do that. In fact, if I took most of you out of this room, there's a very low probability that you'd be able to tell me what color the walls were, or even if those things were on the walls. And the reason for that is that who cares? As long as the walls don't move, color is irrelevant, and there's no reason for you to remember it. It has no emotional significance. It has no value. And so what you do instead is, well, this is what you're doing. So why are you here? I don't mean in the broad metaphysical sense. I mean specifically, why are you here right now? And I would say, well, you're students, obviously, and you're trying to get a degree, and you know, you believe that that will have some functional utility. Maybe you'll be a little wiser and a little more literate and be able to think a little better and be able to write a little better, and so you'll actually be more functional in the world. That would be good, you know, and maybe you're interested, but anyways, you're in this particular lecture so that you can take this particular class, so that you can get a particular kind of degree, so that you can launch your life, and then in your life you're probably going to meet someone that you have a long-term relationship with, and you're going to have children, and you're going to partake in this society, and that's why you're here. All of those reasons simultaneously is why you're here. And so then that helps you decide what to look at. And so what you look at is, at the moment, or listen to, is me, because in principle I'm the gateway to that set of accomplishments at this moment. And so you focus on me, and that's because you value that. And so what that means is you can't even look at the world without a value structure. You know, it's chaos if everything is equally unimportant, or if everything is equally important. It's chaos. And so a value system structures the very way that you perceive the world. And I don't mean that metaphysically. There's plenty of experiments that have demonstrated that, like the invisible gorilla experiment, which, how many of you know about the invisible gorilla experiment? How many don't? Well, roughly speaking, what happens is that there are two teams, a white team dressed in white and a team dressed in black, and there's a video of them, and the black team is passing a basketball back and forth, and the white team is passing a basketball back and forth, and you're supposed to count the times the basketball gets passed back and forth. There's only one basketball. And so, you know, you're diligent for whatever reason. You do what the experimenter asks you, and you count the basketball tosses, and you think, well, that's not so hard, it's like 16. So you tell them 16, and they say, did you see the gorilla? And half of you say, what are you talking about? And the experimenter says, well, let's watch again, but this time don't count. Well, sure enough, like 30 seconds into the video, and you know, the players fill the video screen. It's not like they're 300 yards in the distance, you know, like little ants playing basketball. They're right filling the screen. You can see their faces. Sure enough, a minute into the video, this guy in a gorilla suit, and he's not little, and neither is the gorilla suit, he comes out, bangs his chest right in the middle of the screen for 5 seconds, and then disappears. And half, more than half actually, of people don't see that. And it's even worse. Dan Simon did another experiment where you're at a counter, you know, at a store, and there's a clerk there, and you're talking to the clerk, and the clerk goes down hypothetically to get something, and a different clerk pops up, and you'd think, hey, I'd notice that, but you don't. And you can even vary the clerk quite a bit, and people don't notice. So we focus on very particular things, and the reason we don't notice is because it actually doesn't matter. In terms of the our ongoing action at that point, the clerk is interchangeable. As long as the entity there acts like a clerk, that's sufficient. So, belief systems structure your perceptions, value systems, we're going to call them value systems. They structure your perceptions, and they also guide your actions, because you act in accordance with your values, conscious or unconscious. You have values that you don't know about because you just don't know yourself very well. You can tell that you have values that you don't know very well, because sometimes you get attracted to people that you know perfectly well. That's a mistake. Or you know, you're trying to tell yourself to study and you don't, and you know, so you're not really in control of yourself to any great degree. Some, and the more integrated you are, the more control you have, but you know, you're kind of a loose collection of arguing sub-personalities, and they're more or less directed towards a single goal, but it depends on how committed you are to that goal, how much you've thought it through, how much you buy into it, how many of the contradictions in your world representation you've managed to iron out, and all of that. So, but in any case, it's value systems that govern action and perception. And so we're going to take an existential perspective, a phenomenological and an existential perspective in this course. And phenomenological means that we're going to base our presuppositions on the idea that what you experience is real, all of it. We're not really dividing the world into object and subject. That isn't how this particular approach works. It's more like you have a field of experience. It includes things like pain, which is not really something objective, I mean, but it's real. I mean, one of the things I've come to understand is you are not required to believe what I'm telling you, by the way. If you have an argument about why some of this doesn't make sense, then, you know, follow that sucker, because I'm trying to tell you what I've reached with regards to bedrock presuppositions, and I haven't been able to put pry bars underneath them, but that doesn't mean you won't, and you know, you should try. Anyways, moral system tells you how to act and what to see, and a shared moral system keeps your emotions under control and fulfills your motivational needs. Now there's this old idea of David Hume's, and David Hume famously posited that you cannot derive an ought from an is, and what he meant by that was that merely knowing the objective facts about something does not tell you how to implement those facts in your life, and that that's actually a gap. Now you could say, and I think this is the case, that that's actually a necessary consequence of the scientific endeavor, because one of the things that you're trying to do as a scientist is to strip away the value of the object, right? Because I don't care what your idiosyncratic notion of the object is. I want to know how you perceive the object such that everyone else will perceive it at least that way, and so that takes the subjectivity completely out of it. And so it might just be a necessary consequence of the scientific method that it doesn't have a morality implicit in it. People argue about that. Sam Harris, for example, argues, he believes that we can come up with a scientific morality. I don't believe that, because I don't think that you can make rational judgments about value. It's too complicated. It's far too complicated. It's something that has to emerge. It can't be. I mean, Marxism was supposed to be a scientific utopia predicated on scientific principles and all of that, and you know, it just didn't work. Anyways, so I kind of buy Hume's argument that you can't derive an ought from an is. Now that's a problem. First of all, it's a problem because you have factual knowledge but you don't know how to implement it. You know, it's like, should you spend money on AIDS, or should you spend money on cancer, or should you spend money on higher education? How the hell are you going to calculate that rationally? You can't, because you just don't have the information at hand. It's not possible to, you know, I worked for a UN committee at one point, and the UN committee had like 100 proposals for how the world could be improved, but there was no order to them. It's like, it wasn't, you know, this was more important than this. It's like, well, that's the end of that. You know, you got to start with something, and so that means you have to make something more important than other things, obviously, in your life. If everything's of equal importance, then you're paralyzed. Now, you know, it's a truism, and probably an oversimplified one, that since the dawn of the scientific revolution, a wedge has been driven through the heart of our society such that the moral systems that we use to unite us, so those would be religious systems fundamentally, have been subject to an intense critique from the scientists. And you know, it's a pretty effective critique. Even if you've maintained a traditional faith, it's like, you know, the scientific onslaught is no joke. And that's a problem as far as I can tell, because, and the problem is that you're still left with the problem of how you should act. And Nietzsche, the philosopher Nietzsche, he would say that we're running on the fumes of Christianity in the West, because over its 1,000 years of domination, let's say 1,500 years of absolute domination, it produced a consensus of morality that was predicated on metaphysical presuppositions, and that organized societies, and those societies are predicated on certain beliefs, like the belief in, really I would say, that something divine inhabits each individual. You know, that's sort of the presumption that's embedded in law. It's sort of the idea that underlies the idea of natural right, right? There's something about you that's so valuable that even the law has to bow to it, even if you're reprehensible, even if you're convicted and reprehensible. Now that's, man, the idea that people came up with that idea, that's a bloody miracle. It's, you know, because generally speaking, your proclivity is, if someone's been even accused of doing something, the general human proclivity is that even if someone's just been accused of doing something terrible, that's enough so that you can stone them to death or do whatever you're going to do with them. Presumption of innocence before guilt, good God, of all the things that aren't automatic, that's got to top the list. You know, it's unbelievable that that occurs. And it's interesting to me because it seems to me that that presupposition that there's something valuable, transcendent about each individual, I wouldn't call that a scientific presupposition, but it seems to be a highly functional presupposition, right? I think, in that it isn't unreasonable to notice that societies that have valued the individual and made the law subject to the individual, even with regards to voting, because that's basically what voting does, it puts sovereignty in the hands of the people, those societies actually seem to work. Now, whether they'll work for the next 300 years, who the hell knows? I don't know, but they've worked pretty well for the last 500 years, let's say, and we've got it pretty good right now. And you know, I suspect most of you are rather pleased that the law recognizes your value as individuals, and you take that for granted, right? You think you have rights, and of course the rights that you have, natural rights, are logical consequence of your transcendent value, and that's nested in, this is Nietzsche's observation, that's nested in a set of metaphysical beliefs. And his idea was that if you wipe out the metaphysical beliefs, eventually you wipe out the whole system, because you've knocked out the cornerstone. And it might take a long time for the thing to shake and fall, but it will. Now, whether he was right or not is hard to say. It looks to me like what's happened since Nietzsche announced the death of God in, say, the late 1800s is that Western society has oscillated between extremes, you know, extremes on the right, Germany, extremes on the left, and you know, with the democracies, at least the other democracies, the democracies managing to stay the course somewhere down the middle. But it's not obvious to me that that can be maintained without the underlying metaphysics. And that's a problem, because whatever you might say about the underlying metaphysics, it's not true the way science is true. And that could be okay, because there might be more than one form of truth. In fact, I think there is. I think there's pragmatic truth, and I think pragmatic truth is actually deeper than scientific truth. And pragmatic truth is the truths that enable you to act in a manner that best, that improves the probability, roughly speaking, of your existence and your reproduction maximally. That's a Darwinian idea. And one of the things about the Darwinian theory, this kind of puts it in opposition to scientific materialism, I would say, is that the Darwinian theory is that you don't have privileged knowledge of the world. And you can actually tell that because you die, right? If you knew enough about the world, you wouldn't die, and you do die. And so you're an embodied theory of sorts, and that theory is good enough to get you along about 80 years and produce some reasonable probability that you'll have children and that they'll survive. That's it, man. That's what you've managed after 3 billion years of evolution. It's a good enough solution. It's a good enough way of acting, and we don't know a better way of acting. And our world conceptions are actually nested inside the Darwinian system. And they might be predicated on pragmatic truths rather than objective truths. Pragmatic truths are truths that have functional utility. And we're alive. We care about being alive. We tend to use our theories as tools. It's possible that our theories are tools, and that they're tools to help us stay alive. Now, I was reading a bit about Camille Paglia the other day, and I've noticed some similarities between, she's a famous gadfly, I would say, of feminists, of classic modern feminists, although she would regard herself as a feminist. unbelievably smart. Like if you want to watch someone who has verbal mastery beyond belief, you can watch Camille Paglia. She seems a little manic to me. She can wrap off an argument at a rate that's just mind-boggling, and it's very coherent, and she tends to shred her opponents in arguments. She's so brilliant. She said something interesting, and she's been influenced by some of the same people that I've been influenced by. She liked this book by Erich Neumann called The Origins and History of Consciousness, which I would recommend if you're interested in Jungian theory, Carl Jung. It's a good introduction to Jungian theory, and it's about the development of consciousness. And it's predicated, like Jung's work and Joseph Campbell's work and Mircea Eliade's work, all of which has been criticized or ignored by the postmodernists, predicated on the idea that human beings have a central narrative, and that central narrative is the dramatic expression of the necessary human system of values, and that's built into us. It's part of our nature. We have a nature as human beings. We're not infinitely malleable by culture, which is a postmodernist claim, and a dangerous one. It's dangerous if we have a nature. Paglia has this idea that the reason that you come to university and you study the humanities, or the proper reason if you do that, is not to engage in premature and destructive criticism of something that you don't even yet understand, but to learn as much as you can about art and literature and poetry and drama and fiction and religious thinking. And this is all a kind of a, you can think about it as a, what is that? What is all that? It's art, it's culture. Music belongs in that category. And like, what the hell, what about music? It's like everyone loves it, or almost everyone. It's a mystery. You listen to music and it's very meaningful. I mean, music gets people through some pretty dark times. Why? It's not obvious, that's for sure. And in most cultures, music plays a very central role in identity formation, and you guys, I think you'll probably find as you age that your favorite music will be the music that you listen to between the ages of 16 and 20. It's kind of like it imprints on you, and it defines maybe that defines a generation. And maybe, in our tribal past, and this is highly likely, when you were being inculcated into the tribal culture, that was inculcated with dance and with masks and with music all at the same time. So you're invited to participate in this drama and to take your place in this drama, and to think of that as a representation of the objective world is just not right. That isn't what it is. It's an invitation to a drama. Now then the question might be, well, is the drama real? And the answer to that is, it depends on what you mean by real. I think that great dramas are more real than real. They're hyper real. They're hyper real because they provide guidelines about how to act that are abstract and even perhaps generic, but applicable across an extraordinary broad range of situations. So imagine this, you get up in the morning, you do a bunch of things, and someone asks you what you're doing, what you did, and you tell them, well, the first thing I did this morning was open my eyes, and the second thing was think about whether I wanted to go back to sleep, and then I took off my blankets, and then I put my feet on the floor, and then I stood up, and I was blinking while I was doing all this, and I was also breathing, and then I looked for my clothes. And you really want to listen to that guy? You don't want to listen to that guy. It's like, why are you telling me that? I want you to tell me something interesting. Well, what is it that's interesting? And why isn't that interesting? It's not obvious. So then imagine the guy actually tells you a pretty good story, and a little adventure. Probably he was doing something normal, something unexpected happened, he had to conjure up some new responses, and he either settled the problem or didn't settle the problem. Yeah, you're interested in that, especially if he settled the problem, because if he can tell you how when he encountered some unexplored territory he was able to sew it back together, then maybe you can do that when that thing happens, and that's pretty cheap wisdom for you. He had to go through all the aggravation of figuring it out, and all you have to do is listen. You know, and that's kind of a classic story. The classic story, roughly speaking, is there's a guy, woman, doesn't matter, going about their life relatively normally. Something blindsides them, and they're in a state of chaos. Chaos is a place. Chaos is the place that you end up when what you're doing and the world stop matching. And the chaos can be of different degrees. You know, you could wake up and find that your house was burgled. You could wake up and find that your parent has Alzheimer's or some fatal disease, or that you do, or that your whole family was murdered, or that there's a war starting, or, you know, there's different degrees of chaos. And I think you can quantify the chaos by calculating how much of what you do and expect is likely to be disrupted by the event. Now, because the more disruption, the more destabilized you're going to be, which is why if someone tells you that you're going to perish painfully in 3 months, it's like, that's a bad one. You're really in an unexpected territory there. Nothing that you assumed that was real, roughly speaking, in the world is real anymore. We like to watch people in their normal life blindsided by something, experiencing this interregnum of chaos where they explore and gather new information and retool their character or retool the world, because either of those would work as a solution, and then come out the other side and things are better than they were to begin with, or at least as good. But better is better. That's a happy ending, right? That's a happy ending. That's a comedy, technically speaking. And so what you want your life to be a comedy. Not that it's supposed to be funny, because comedy doesn't have to be funny, technically speaking. It's just the opposite of tragedy. Tragedy is when you're going along pretty well and you get blindsided, and that's that. And you know, that can certainly happen. It happens to people all the time. But it's a comedy you want. Now, what I hope to provide you with is a magic code. You know, there was a book published a while back. Tom Hanks was in the movie. He was a Harvard professor who went around solving symbolic mysteries. Do you remember, what was it called? The Da Vinci Code. Everyone liked that. It sold a lot. And you know, it was full of little mysteries, and it was full of hints that there was more to the world than you think, and which is definitely true. And that, you know, there was a way of getting access to that knowledge, and that it would really be worthwhile. And people like that, they like that idea. And the reason for that is because it's actually, it's true. It's true. It's true like fiction is true. So okay, let's go back to the guy who's telling you about his morning. Well, he tells you something exciting. Well, then imagine that 10 people tell you something exciting. And then you extract out the pattern of them dealing with this problem from that. And so then you have that's what you do if you're an author, right? Because in a book, you don't want the book exactly to be about what ordinary people do in ordinary times in their life. It's like, you already know how to be ordinary during ordinary times of your life. That's not useful. You know, you wouldn't watch a videotape of yourself. Imagine you videotaped yourself during a day, and then next day you watched that. It's like, God, who would want to do that? So what seems to happen in stories is that they distill. So they watch people watch people, and then they tell stories about what they see, but they leave a lot out of those stories. Everything that's boring, hopefully. And then more and more stories about exciting things get sort of aggregated, and then maybe a great writer comes along and writes something really, really interesting, profound character transformations, and then you say, well, that's fiction, and then you say, well, that's not true because it's fiction, but then maybe that's not right. Maybe it's more than true, because who wants the truth? The truth is mundane reality, and you've already got that mastered. What you want is the distillation of interesting experience. And you might think, well, why is it interesting? Well, that's a really good question, because you don't actually know. And believe me, you really don't know, because you'll be interested in things that just don't make any sense at all. I'm going to walk you a bit today through Pinocchio, and we'll do that more the next time too. You know, but I want to tell you a little bit about that movie to begin with, just so you know how crazy you are. So, you know the plot. How many people have seen the Disney movie Pinocchio? Okay, so lots of people. So that's strange enough in itself that so many people have seen it, and it's worth thinking about. You know, you tend to show your kids that movie, but you think about the movie, you're doing some pretty weird things when you're sitting there watching that movie, man. First of all, it's drawings, right, and they're low resolution drawings. You don't care, and you watch The Simpsons, or maybe what's that called? The one that's been concentrating on political correctness so much. South Park. God, that animation, man, it's just awful, right? It's just horrible. It couldn't be worse. You don't care. Like round heads, smile, a little bit of shuffling. That's a person as far as you're concerned. It's just irrelevant, and if it was higher resolution, it wouldn't help. You just need the bare bones, right, to hang your perceptions on. So you watch this drawing, that's Pinocchio, beautiful drawings, animated in a sequence. You're not watching something real, you're watching a pure construction, and then you think about the plot, it's like, it's completely absurd. Everything about it is absurd. It's like, well, one of the characters is a bug, and he turns out to be like the conscience, and so what the hell is with that? And then another character is this puppet, marionette, and you know, somehow he gets free of his strings and then goes on this adventure, and then you know, he gets enticed into various nefarious places by a fox and a cat, and then he rescues his father from a whale, and you don't even know how his father got in the whale. It's like the last time you see his father, he was in a rainstorm, and the next thing that happens is he's in a whale, and you're sitting there thinking, hey, no problem, this all makes sense. It's like, what, really? Why? How does that make sense? Well, the answer is you don't know. That's the thing that's so cool. You don't know. You don't even know what you're watching. But it doesn't matter. You watch it and you're interested in it. You want to see what the hell happens to this puppet. You want to see if he ends up becoming a real boy, because it seems important. Well, you say, well, is Pinocchio true? Well, that's a stupid question. It's partly a stupid question because the answer is it depends on what you mean by true. And it isn't obvious to me what you should mean when you say that something's true. And the reason it's not obvious is because we have this idea in our society, and it's a very profound idea, and that idea is that the ultimate truth is scientific truth, that tells us about the nature of the world, and it does that in a final way in some sense. There's no brooking any arguments about it, and the physicists have got it right, and that's why they can make hydrogen bombs, and that's a pretty good demonstration of their being right. But you don't act as if that's true. And you don't, and you watch things and pay attention to things and are captivated by things that aren't predicated on those assumptions. And it seems to me that there is a problem of what the world is made out of, but there's a bigger problem, and that's the problem of how you should conduct yourself in the world. And that's really what you want to know. People want to know that more than anything. because you need to know. It's like, here you guys are in university, it's like you don't know what you're doing. I mean, some of you know more than others, but you're at the beginning of your life, and life is very complex and chaotic, and it isn't exactly obvious, you know, what kind of relationship you should form, or what sort of character you should develop, or what you're going to do for a job, or what's the meaning of life. That's a good one. What's the meaning of life? Well, and you know, people come to university, at least many of them, and that's kind of what they want to find out. Now Paglia, her notion is that, you could think about it this way, is that articulated knowledge is embedded in inarticulate knowledge, and inarticulate knowledge is the domain of literature and art and high culture, let's say. And we sort of know what it means, but we don't exactly know what it means. It means more than we know, and then outside of that is what we don't know at all. And that's an idea that Jung developed as well, and maybe Paglia picked it up from Jung, because Jung believed that, you know, there was this domain that we had mastered in every domain, and then there was a domain outside of that which you could think of as unexplored territory, and what we met unexplored territory with was our creative imagination, and that what we were trying to do with our creative imagination is to figure out how to deal with that unexplored territory. We were producing dramas that we could act out that would help us deal with what we still hadn't mastered, and then outside of that there's just what we don't know at all. And Paglia's idea, and this was Jung's idea, was that without understanding that surround, you're too atomized. You're not part of your historical tradition. You haven't incorporated the spirit of your ancestors who built all this. You're just here now, and you don't know what to do either, and you don't know how to maintain your culture, and you don't know how to serve it. And you know, you might say, well, why should you serve your culture? And well, I have a hypothesis about that. You know, you can think about this. I don't know if it's true, but people ask what the meaning of life is, and it seems to me that meaning is proportionate to the adoption of responsibility. You know, like, let's say you have a little sister who's like 3. You're going to take care of her. Like, questioning whether that's a good idea just seems stupid. You know what I mean? It just doesn't seem like the right kind of question. It's like, well, obviously, self-evidently, let's say, that's what you do. And do you find it meaningful? It's like, probably, you know, interacting with a little kid. When I had little kids, you know, when they were like 2 or under, we took them out to see their relatives, and they were older people, and you know, they watched that 2-year-old like it was a fire. You know, every second that little kid was in the room, every single adult was focused on him or her. That's something that people attend to, and that's a source of meaning. And what else is meaningful? Well, your family relationships are meaningful to you, and maybe the responsibility that you adopt as a friend, that seems meaningful. Maybe your decision to pursue a particular career and be of some utility in society, you know, part of that's governed by your desire to establish some security and get ahead. It's fine, but you're also playing an integral role in the maintenance of the structure that supports you. And my observation has been that in my clinical practice is that people just have a hell of a time if they don't slot in somewhere. You know, you think, I got to go to work at 9 in the morning, and you know, I've got this rigid schedule. It's like, it's probably a good idea to be grateful for that, because what I've noticed is that if people pull out from those externally scaffolded systems, they drift, they get depressed, they get anxious, they don't know what to do with themselves. You know, they're kind of like sled dogs with no sled, and we're kind of like sled dogs as far as I can tell, beasts of burden. Like, we need a load, man, we need a load. And the question is, what sort of load do you need? And here's why I think we need that. You know, I've been thinking about how to figure out what's real for a long time, and because I'm an existentialist, I'm operating under the presupposition that you can tell what people believe by watching how they act. I don't care what they say. I don't care what their statements are about their view of reality, because the relationship between that and their actual actions is certainly not perfect, and sometimes doesn't even exist.